I never should have been here, Sophie Blake thought, the words echoing in her head as she stood frozen outside the conference room door. Her eyes flickered to the polished brass handle, its coldness mocking her confusion. She'd just been running errands for her boss, delivering papers for a meeting that wasn't supposed to be her responsibility. But here she was, standing outside the wrong door, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Inside, voices rose in sharp tones, tense and serious. Sophie pressed her ear to the door, trying to make out the conversation. Her pulse quickened when she heard a name she didn't recognize, followed by a discussion of logistics and money. "This isn't my business," she whispered to herself, turning to walk away. But just as her hand reached for the door, it swung open. Sophie stumbled backward, eyes wide, her heart pounding in her chest. The man who stepped out was the last person she expected to see. Vincent D'Amico. The man who everyone in the city feared. The Mafia boss who ran the entire downtown district with an iron fist. His steely eyes met hers for a brief moment before his lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. "You're in the wrong place," Vincent said, his voice low, controlled and unsettling. Sophie's stomach churned. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she stammered, backing away, hoping to escape before things got worse. But it was too late. His gaze never wavered. He stepped closer, the weight of his presence almost suffocating. "Now you know too much," Vincent said, his voice colder than the marble floors beneath their feet. Sophie swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the danger closing in. Vincent's dark eyes never left hers as he gestured for her to follow him. "You'll come with me," he said simply, his tone not leaving room for argument. Sophie shook her head, confused and panicked. I didn't hear anything. I don't know anything." But Vincent merely raised an eyebrow. "The problem is, now you do. You don't get to walk away from this. Not anymore." Sophie's heart raced as she followed him into the meeting room, the door clicking shut behind them. She felt trapped, her mind spinning with questions. What had she just walked into? How had a simple mistake turned into this? And more importantly, what did Vincent D'Amico want with her? The door clicked shut behind Sophie, the soft sound echoing in the vast, sterile room. She took a step back, eyes darting around, her mind racing. This wasn't happening. She had to leave, had to run. She didn't belong here. But the man before her, Vincent D'Amico, wasn't giving her that option. His presence was overwhelming, like a shadow that stretched across the room. His eyes, dark and calculating, never left her as he stood near the desk, his back straight, exuding authority without a single word. Sophie could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to suffocate. "I told you," Vincent said, his voice smooth, each word deliberate, "you're not going anywhere." Sophie's breath hitched in her throat. "I didn't hear anything, I swear," she pleaded, her voice shaky. "I don't know what this is about. I was just bringing some papers for my boss." Vincent tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. "It's not about what you heard," he replied, his tone almost too calm. "It's about what you've seen." Sophie took a step back, pressing her back against the cold metal of the desk. "I don't understand. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Vincent's gaze softened ever so slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "You're not the first to make that mistake," he said, his lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "But unlike the others, you're still here." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. "Please, I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to do my job." Vincent's smile faded. "You're already in trouble, whether you want it or not. You walked into my world and now you're part of it." He stepped forward, his movements fluid, almost predatory. Sophie wanted to step back, to run, but she couldn't make her legs move. "I won't hurt you," Vincent said, his voice softening, but his eyes remained cold and unyielding. "But you have to understand that you're no longer just a witness. You've seen things you shouldn't have. And now, you're going to be useful to me." Sophie swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know how I can help you. I'm just a secretary. I don't know anything about this." Vincent studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "You don't have to know everything. All I need is for you to stay quiet and do exactly what I say. Simple enough, don't you think?" Sophie nodded slowly, unsure of what else to do. Good, Vincent said, his voice firm, then you can start by making yourself comfortable. This isn't going to be quick. She could barely hear the words. Her mind was still trying to process everything that had just happened. She had walked into the wrong room. And now, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. I don't belong here, Sophie thought, her mind still reeling from everything Vincent had said. She stood there, her back pressed against the cold metal of the desk, feeling small and out of place in the luxurious, dimly lit office. Vincent D'Amico had a presence that made her feel like she was suffocating. It wasn't just his physical stature, though he was tall and imposing. It was the way he moved, the way he spoke, like he was used to being in control of everything, everyone. What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked around her, his steps slow, measured, as if he were studying her every movement. I already told you, he said, his voice low, you're going to help me. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what he meant, but she was starting to fear the implications. How? She asked, her voice shaky. Vincent stopped in front of her, his eyes locking onto hers with a steady intensity. You'll know when the time comes, he replied. Sophie felt a cold shiver run down her spine. I don't know if I can do this, she murmured, taking a small step back. You don't have a choice, Vincent said, his voice unwavering. You're already involved. You can't just walk away now. His words felt like a punch to her stomach, but there was no anger in his tone, only the cold, undeniable truth. Sophie's mind raced as she tried to process everything. She had always thought of herself as someone who followed the rules, who kept her head down and did her job. But now she was caught in a situation she couldn't control, trapped in a world that she knew nothing about. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Vincent stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Now you stay here and wait. You're going to be watched. Everything you do, everything you say, will be under my watch, he said. Sophie's pulse quickened. What does that mean? What are you going to do to me? She asked, her voice trembling. Vincent's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, his voice soothing, almost reassuring. But you need to understand that you're no longer in control. I am. And you're going to learn that soon enough. Sophie swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. She didn't know what he meant, but she could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. She was in too deep now, and there was no way out. You'll stay here for a while, Vincent continued. I have some things to take care of, but when I come back, we'll talk more. I need you to understand exactly what this means for you. Sophie nodded, but inside, she was screaming. Her world had just been turned upside down, and she had no idea how to navigate it. All she knew was that Vincent D'Amico wasn't going to let her go. Not now, not ever. The hours that followed felt like a blur to Sophie. She sat in the luxurious office, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Vincent D'Amico had given her no choice but to stay, to wait, and now she was trapped. She couldn't leave, not without risking something far worse than what she was already facing. The silence in the room was suffocating. She could hear her own breath, shallow and quick, as she shifted uneasily in the chair. Vincent had told her she would be watched, and the weight of those words kept her on edge. She hadn't expected the life she had known to change so suddenly, so drastically. She had never been involved in anything dangerous, never thought twice about the world outside her office. Now, everything was different. Every sound in the building made her jump. Every shadow seemed to move, and every creak of the floor made her heart race. Sophie had been trying to remain calm, but her nerves were frayed. She stood up from the chair, walking over to the window, hoping the view of the city would ground her. The lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt distant, almost out of reach. She couldn't focus on the city. She couldn't focus on anything except the fact that she was now part of something far bigger than herself. Minutes turned to hours. Vincent hadn't returned yet, and Sophie had no idea what to expect when he did. She wasn't sure if she wanted to see him again, but she knew she had no choice. Her mind kept returning to his words, "You're no longer in control." I am. Those words, cold and final, echoed in her mind. She was still processing them, still trying to understand what it meant for her future. The door creaked open and Sophie froze. She turned around quickly, her heart skipping a beat. There he was, Vincent D'Amico, standing in the doorway, his presence filling the room. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the air seemed to crackle with tension. "I see you've been waiting," he said, his voice smooth, almost casual. Sophie couldn't bring herself to speak. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what he expected from her. Vincent stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving her. He was dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice still calm, "about what happens next." Sophie's stomach churned. She had no idea what he meant, but she could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent paused, his lips curling into a faint smile. "It's not about what I want," he said. "It's about what you're going to do." Sophie swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice shaking. Vincent's smile faded slightly. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, taking a step closer. "But for now, just know that you're here for a reason. And I won't let you leave until I've gotten what I need from you." Sophie's mind raced. What did he want from her? And more importantly, why was she the one who had to be involved? The answers were still out of her reach, and she wasn't sure if she would ever find them. But one thing was certain, her life had changed in a way she couldn't undo. She was trapped in Vincent's world, and she had no idea how to get out. Vincent didn't say anything as he stepped into the room, but his presence was enough to fill the space with an undeniable weight. Sophie stood frozen, unsure of what he expected from her next. She had tried to brace herself for whatever was coming, but nothing could have prepared her for the way he made her feel, small, insignificant, like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. He was still watching her, his eyes piercing through her, and, for a moment, Sophie felt like she couldn't breathe. "You're not going to answer my question?" he asked, his voice smooth, but there was a sharp edge to it now. Sophie's throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" she asked again, her voice barely more than a whisper. Vincent gave her a small, almost pitying smile. "I told you already," he said. "You're going to help me." Sophie couldn't keep the confusion from her face. "How? I don't even know what this is about." Vincent's eyes darkened slightly, his jaw tightening. "You will soon enough," he said, taking a step closer. "I'm not asking you to understand everything right now. I just need you to listen and follow my instructions. For your own good, I suggest you do exactly that." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust any of this. But she had no choice. She was already in too deep. "What are you going to have me do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the window, his back to her, as if he were surveying the city below. Sophie couldn't help but notice how confident he looked. Everything about him screamed power, and it was clear he was used to being in control. He turned back to her, his eyes now cold and calculating. "There's something you need to understand," he said slowly. "You're not just here to stand around and wait. You're going to help me with something very important. Something that involves a lot more than you realize." Sophie swallowed hard, trying to process his words. "I'm not sure I can do this," she said, her voice almost pleading. "I don't know what you want from me. I'm just a secretary." Vincent's gaze never faltered, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter who you are," he said, his voice low and steady. "What matters is that you're here now. And you're going to do what I say. Because if you don't..." His words trailed off, but Sophie didn't need him to finish the sentence. She could feel the threat hanging in the air. "What if I don't?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Vincent stepped closer to her, his eyes narrowing. "You don't want to find out," he said, his tone now dark and dangerous. Sophie took a step back, her mind racing. "What are you going to do?" she asked, unable to hide the fear in her voice. Vincent's lips curled into a faint smile. "You'll see," he said softly. "You'll see soon enough." Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just been irrevocably changed. She had walked into this building by accident, and now she was trapped. There was no way out, not unless Vincent allowed it. and Sophie wasn't sure if she had the strength to survive whatever was coming next. The days that followed felt like a blur to Sophie. Vincent D'Amico had made it clear she was no longer in control of her own life. Every move she made, every word she said, felt like it was being watched. The walls of the office were closing in around her, and the weight of Vincent's presence was always looming over her. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape him. Each morning, she would wake up in the same cold room, feeling the same anxiety clawing at her insides. She had no idea what Vincent wanted from her, but every conversation left her more confused and more terrified. He was always polite, always calm, but there was something about him that made her feel like she was walking on the edge of a knife. "You're still here, I see." Vincent's voice broke through her thoughts one afternoon as he entered the room. Sophie glanced up, surprised by the sudden interruption. He was dressed in his usual dark suit, his eyes sharp and calculating as they locked onto hers. "I haven't gone anywhere," Sophie replied, trying to keep her tone neutral, though she could feel her hands shaking slightly. Vincent didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked around her, his footsteps echoing through the room. Sophie couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he commanded the space, how every inch of him seemed to radiate power. She felt small in comparison, like she was nothing more than a spectator in her own life. "You don't have to be afraid," Vincent said finally, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I'm not going to hurt you. But you need to understand that you're part of something much bigger than you realize." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent stopped in front of her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're here because I need you," he said simply. "You're going to help me with something that's very important. Something that could change everything." Sophie swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. She didn't understand. She didn't know what he wanted from her. "What is it that you need me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. Vincent gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll know when the time comes," he said, his voice low and steady. "For now, just trust me." Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she couldn't trust him, that everything about this situation was wrong. But she knew better. She knew there was no escaping this world, not now. "And if I don't?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though she already knew the answer. Vincent's smile faded slightly, and his gaze darkened. "You don't want to find out," he said softly, his tone cold. Sophie nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't run anymore. She was stuck in this world, and there was no way out. Vincent turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he paused. "Remember," he said, his voice just loud enough for her to hear, "you're mine now. And there's no turning back." The door clicked shut behind him, and Sophie was left alone, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't know what she had gotten herself into, but she knew her life had changed forever. Days passed, and Sophie was starting to feel like she was losing herself. She hadn't seen Vincent much, but she could always feel his presence in the air, looming over her. The staff at the building treated her with a certain coldness, a silent understanding that she didn't belong, but was somehow tied to the world that Vincent controlled. Sophie had been kept in a small, sterile office in the back of the building. No one explained why she was there, but they didn't need to. The silence was enough to remind her that she was trapped. She spent most of her days sitting in that office, wondering what Vincent wanted from her. She couldn't stop thinking about the cryptic things he had said, the way he looked at her when he spoke, like she was a part of some plan she didn't understand. She wanted to scream, to break free, but every time she tried to form a plan, her mind would go blank and her body would freeze. One evening, as the sky outside grew darker, Sophie was sitting by the window, staring out at the city that seemed so far away from her now. She wanted to feel the cool night air, but the thought of stepping outside made her sick to her stomach. She didn't know what Vincent would do if she tried to leave. Would he let her go? Or would he come after her, forcing her to return? The fear gnawed at her, and her heart raced with every passing minute. "You're still here." The voice interrupted her thoughts, and Sophie turned around quickly. Vincent was standing in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow in the dim light. His expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp as always. Sophie didn't speak right away. There was nothing she could say to him. "I've been thinking about you," Vincent continued, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. Sophie swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. Vincent didn't answer immediately. He just walked toward her, his steps slow and measured, his gaze never leaving her face. Sophie's heart thudded in her chest. "Because I need you," Vincent said simply, stopping just a few feet away from her. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "For what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vincent's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You'll find out soon enough," he replied. "But for now, I need you to trust me." Sophie felt a knot form in her stomach. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anything about this situation. But she also knew that she was stuck, that she had no choice but to go along with whatever he had planned. "I don't have a choice, do I?" she asked, her voice trembling. Vincent's smile faded slightly, but there was no anger in his expression. "No," he said softly, his voice calm, almost gentle. "You don't. But that's not necessarily a bad thing." Sophie felt her chest tighten. She wanted to argue, to say something that would make him leave her alone, but she knew it was pointless. She was trapped in this world now, and there was no way out. Vincent stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I'm giving you a chance," he said, his voice low, almost reassuring. "You don't have to like it. You don't have to understand it. But you will learn to accept it. Because in the end, you'll see that it's for your own good." Sophie's mind raced, but she couldn't find the words to respond. She was too scared to speak, too scared to do anything. She just stood there, frozen, as Vincent continued to watch her, as if he were waiting for her to come to terms with her fate. But she didn't know how to accept this, how to accept that she was a part of this world now. And as Vincent's gaze stayed fixed on her, Sophie realized one thing: her life, her future, was no longer in her hands. It belonged to him. The days dragged on, and Sophie was still in that same cold, sterile office, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't make sense of. Vincent had given her little to no explanation, yet somehow, she knew the tension was building, the stakes were rising. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was just waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. Every time she tried to think about her life outside this place, her chest tightened. The freedom she had once taken for granted felt so distant now, like a memory from another lifetime. She was here, trapped in a world she didn't understand, and she couldn't escape it. Vincent's words echoed in her mind. "You'll learn to accept it. You'll see it's for your own good." Sophie didn't know if she could ever accept it. She didn't know if she could ever feel safe again. She spent the evenings pacing the office, her mind swirling with questions. What exactly did Vincent want from her? What kind of deal was she tangled up in? She had no answers, only more questions, and each day felt like it was pulling her deeper into something she could never escape. Then, one evening, as the sun set and the city lights flickered on, Vincent entered the office once more. This time, he didn't speak right away. He simply watched her, his eyes calculating, studying her every move. Sophie froze, her heart racing as she tried to find her voice. "What is it now?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready for his answer. Vincent stepped closer, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, Sophie wondered if she would ever truly understand him. "I think it's time for you to understand why you're here," he said, his voice steady and calm. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "I don't understand anything. Why am I here?" "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent paused for a moment before speaking again, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're here because you're valuable to me. And in this world, everything has a price," he said, his voice low, almost like a warning. Sophie didn't understand. What price? She was just a secretary. She wasn't part of this world, and yet, here she was, caught in the middle of something far bigger than she could ever have imagined. "I don't have anything of value," Sophie said, the words coming out more desperate than she intended. "You have information," Vincent replied, his tone still steady. And that makes you important. People in my world, they don't always understand that. But you'll learn. You'll see how valuable you are to me soon enough. Sophie swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice trembling. Vincent's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. For now, just follow my lead, he said. That's all I'm asking. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do. Sophie's mind was spinning, and she was finding it harder and harder to keep up with his cryptic answers. What did he want from her? What role was she supposed to play in this world? She had no idea, but one thing was certain. She was in it now, and there was no turning back. You'll be fine, Vincent said, his voice softening slightly. Just trust me. Sophie didn't know if she could trust him, but she had no choice but to go along with whatever he had planned. She nodded slowly, her heart heavy with fear and uncertainty. As Vincent turned to leave, he paused at the door. Remember, Sophie, he said, his voice low, you're not just a secretary anymore. You're part of something bigger. And you'll do whatever it takes to survive in it. Sophie stood there, frozen, as the door clicked shut behind him. She was caught in Vincent's world now, and there was no telling where it would lead. All she knew was that she couldn't escape. Not anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie found herself falling deeper into the world Vincent had dragged her into. She still didn't fully understand her role, but each passing day brought new tasks, each more confusing than the last. Vincent never explained much, but he gave her just enough to keep her moving forward. He would appear unexpectedly, always calm, always in control, offering no real answers to her questions. Yet somehow, she felt that she was being pulled further into something far bigger than herself. Sophie had stopped trying to find a way out. It wasn't that she had given up, but rather that she had realized the futility of resisting. She was a part of this world now, whether she liked it or not. The walls of her small office seemed to close in on her more with each passing day. The feeling of being watched never left. There was always someone lurking in the background, observing her every move. She couldn't even leave the building without Vincent's approval, and every time she stepped outside, it felt like a trap, like she was walking into the lion's den. And then there were the moments when Vincent would speak to her in his quiet, controlled way, and she would find herself questioning her own thoughts. You're not like them, Sophie, he had told her one afternoon, his voice smooth and almost reassuring. You're not here to be a puppet. I don't need you to be something you're not. His words haunted her. Was that supposed to be a comfort? She didn't feel like herself anymore. She didn't know who she was supposed to be. Every interaction with him felt like a test, a game she didn't know the rules to. Sophie tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She would make small talk with the staff, but they always seemed distant, as though they knew something she didn't. She'd hear whispers behind her back, but when she turned to look, the voices would fall silent. It was like living in a glass bubble. She could see the world around her, but no one could see her for what she truly was. A pawn, a player, or just someone caught in the web. Sophie, Vincent's voice broke through her thoughts again, dragging her back to the present. She looked up to see him standing at the door of her office, his expression unreadable. I need you to come with me, he said, his tone as smooth and commanding as always. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him much lately, and when he spoke like that, she knew it wasn't a request. It was a command. She stood up from her desk, her legs trembling slightly as she made her way toward him. Where are we going? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though inside, her mind was racing. I'll explain when we get there, Vincent replied, his lips curling into a faint, unreadable smile. Sophie didn't ask any more questions. She followed him down the long hallways, her thoughts a blur of fear and confusion. What was happening? What was he planning? The questions bubbled up inside her, but she knew better than to voice them. She didn't know what would happen when they arrived at their destination, but she could feel the weight of whatever was coming next pressing down on her. When they reached the elevator, Vincent stepped inside first and Sophie followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The doors closed, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Sophie glanced at Vincent, but he was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. The elevator descended, and Sophie felt a sense of unease wash over her. She didn't know where they were going, but something told her it wasn't going to be good. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened to reveal a long, dimly lit hallway. Sophie swallowed hard, her throat dry as she followed Vincent down the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last, and she could feel the weight of whatever was coming next hanging over her. Vincent stopped at a door and turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "This is where it starts," he said, his voice low and steady. Sophie didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. And with that, Vincent opened the door, and Sophie stepped into the unknown.